The morning of December 7, 1941 began like any other day at the U.S. naval base of Pearl Harbor. Lying peacefully in the heart of the Pacific Ocean, rows of palm trees swayed gently. The water lay still like a mirror, reflecting the silhouettes of giant battleships anchored motionless. Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia, California, Nevada, Tennessee, and Maryland, none of the men on duty that morning knew that in less than an hour, their world would change forever. In the mess hall, the smell of bacon and hot coffee drifted through the air. A few sailors joked about their upcoming leave. On the deck of the Arizona, a young sailor named James Carter was halfway through a letter to his family in Chicago, writing that in Hawaii, everything feels peaceful, as if war never existed. But that peace was only a thin veil covering a plan that had been prepared for months on the other side of the Pacific. On the decks of the carriers Akagi, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, the atmosphere was the complete opposite. Japanese pilots quietly tightened their harnesses and tied white headbands around their foreheads. In the wind, the engines of Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters roared louder and louder. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind this bold operation, believed that only a powerful surprise strike could crush America's will to fight. The order to launch was given. The first wave of 183 aircraft shot off the carriers like a swarm of steel birds, heading straight for Hawaii, where the sun was just beginning to rise. No one on the vast ocean ahead knew they were speeding toward destiny. At 7 a.m., at the American base, the Opana Point radar station suddenly detected a large blip on the screen, a massive formation of aircraft approaching from the north. Two young radar operators stared at each other in confusion. They reported it up the chain of command, but were told, "It's probably the incoming B-17s from the mainland. Just keep an eye on it." A small mistake, but one that would change history. 7:48 a.m. Above Pearl Harbor, the sun was blocked by dozens of black dots racing in at terrifying speed. Then a scream tore across the sky. Tora, Tora, Tora. The coded signal of Japanese success. The surprise attack had worked. In that instant, hell opened. Zero fighters swooped down, unleashing storms of bullets onto Hickam, Wheeler, and Ford Island airfields. Fire erupted from the hangars. Over 180 American aircraft were destroyed or crippled on the ground, unable even to lift their wheels off the runway. Air raid sirens shrieked across the naval base. Sailors rushed onto the decks, many still in their pajamas. They barely had time to grasp what was happening when from the north, Aichi D-3A, Val, dive bombers appeared. They plunged like arrows, each carrying armor-piercing bombs weighing hundreds of kilograms. The first bomb struck the USS Arizona, a blinding flash, followed by a deafening explosion. The forward ammunition magazine detonated, sending a pillar of fire dozens of meters into the sky. The shockwave tore everything apart: steel, decks, and the fate of over 1,100 men. The Arizona became a sea of flames in less than 9 minutes. On the USS Oklahoma, the crew hadn't even reached battle stations before bombs and torpedoes slammed into the hull. The massive ship rolled over and capsized, trapping 429 men in the darkness below. Screams echoed from the burning, oil-coated sea. Men jumped into the water to escape the flames, only to be swallowed by thick layers of burning oil. On the surface, patches of fire drifted like thousands of floating red blossoms. James Carter, the young sailor who had been writing a letter that morning, was blown off the Arizona's deck in the explosion. He saw only a towering fireball, like a second sun, before he was thrown into the water. The sea burned hot with flaming oil, but he kept swimming, grabbing for floating debris. Amid the gunfire, explosions, and tearing metal, he heard people shouting, "Hold on, swim to shore, don't look back." But for them, the battle had only just begun. 8:30 a.m. The first wave had barely passed when a second wave of 170 planes roared in from the sea. The surviving American sailors, shocked and soaked in oil, could only lift their machine guns and fire weak bursts into a sky stained black with smoke. The Nevada, West Virginia, and California took more bombs and torpedoes. The Nevada tried to get underway, to avoid blocking the harbor channel, but was hammered by Zero fighters. The captain finally ordered the ship to run aground to avoid sinking and obstructing the entrance. Explosions continued non-stop, shaking the ground. Thick, black smoke wrapped around Pearl Harbor. darkening the sky like ink. In the military hospital, nurses could barely keep up. Burn victims, wounded men, those choking on smoke, were carried in endlessly. Everyone was covered in soot and oil, they could hardly recognize one another. A young nurse later recalled that she had to wipe each face clean just to see if the man was still alive. Out in the harbor, survivors began hearing faint metal tapping from inside an overturned hull. It was the desperate call for help from sailors trapped within the Oklahoma. They tapped rhythmically, hoping someone would hear. Rescue teams worked day and night. They drilled small holes in the steel, trying to pump air in. Some men were saved, many others never answered again as the tapping slowly faded. Amid the chaos, rare moments of resistance still flared. American anti-aircraft crews, despite shock and unpreparedness, managed to shoot down 29 Japanese aircraft. Many fought to their last round, surrounded by fire and falling steel. But the price was devastating. When the second wave finally left, the Hawaiian sky held a thin, lingering haze of smoke. Through it came the sounds of ambulance sirens, the cries of the wounded, and the muffled sobs of American sailors, forming a tragic symphony the world would never forget. Around 10 a.m., the skies grew quiet again. The last Zero fighters vanished toward the sea. But for the Americans, the nightmare had only begun to reveal its cost. Across Pearl Harbor, the only sounds were metal still sizzling, water trickling over the sinking hulks of giant ships. Rescue crews collected shattered bodies, severely burned survivors, and men so traumatized they couldn't speak. Of the more than 2,400 Americans killed, most died right where they stood. Japan believed this blow would break America's resolve, but they were wrong. The next day, in Washington, President Franklin D. Roosevelt stood before Congress and spoke the immortal words. December 7, 1941. A date which will live in infamy. Within hours of that speech, the United States declared war on Japan, and the wheel of World War II turned to a new chapter, fiercer, larger, and bloodier. The American aircraft carriers, absent from Pearl Harbor on the day of the attack, became the spearhead of the decisive battles that followed. Coral Sea, Midway, Guadalcanal. The survivors of Pearl Harbor carried memories that scarred them for life. The smell of burning oil on their skin, the screams of comrades, and the sight of the sea glowing with drifting flames, like 1,000 crimson scars.